Oh, here's this. Here's this. We'll talk about January 6th. Have you seen the revelations? Tucker Carlson, I'm not going to show him on here, but you can go look at him. It's amazing. They lied about January 6th. The guy with the horns, right? The buffalo head or whatever. The police were like his tour guides. Watch the video. They're taking him around the Capitol. They try to open doors for him. The police escort people into the building. It's, utterly amazing what they've revealed. Furthermore, the evidence of police informants having made the Capitol riot what it was is massive. All kinds of evidence has come to show that the Capitol riot was very much staged by the government. That's, look at the facts. Tucker Carlson says it, and look, I have always said on these streams that as the Center for Political Innovation, we have always called for a blanket amnesty of all Black liberation fighters. Mumia Abu-Jamal should be released. Jamil Al-Amin, also known as H. Rap Brown, he should be released. All the former members of the Black Liberation Army, all of them should be released. All right. And because we know about COINTELPRO and how the U.S. government killed Fred Hampton, how the U.S. government engaged in all kinds of frame-ups and criminal activities. They sent Geronimo Pratt to prison for years when he was innocent. Based on every evil thing, all the evil the American government did during the 1970s, there needs to be a blanket amnesty for Black liberation fighters and for, all the Weathermen, the May 19th Communist Organization, the Revolutionary Armed Task Force, the Black Liberation Army, that we obviously don't endorse what these people did. We are opposed to any ultra-left adventurism, terrorism. We don't know that all these people are guilty, right? We don't know the details of their cases, but regardless, based on the facts that there was a huge amount of the violation of rights of Americans during that period, we call for a blanket amnesty, and that includes Leonard Peltier. All right, Leonard Peltier is a Native American activist. The evidence seems to indicate he did not kill those FBI agents in the shootout. It was friendly fire from other FBI agents who killed them. The other Native Americans who were arrested were acquitted in federal court. So they need to free Leonard Peltier, the Native American activist. They ought to free him. And I have always said this. You can go find an article. It might even still be on the internet. I don't know. They've done a lot to erase me from history. Leonard Peltier, FBI. I had a protest at my college. I remember years ago when I was a college student. The FBI had a recruitment workshop at my college. And, we protested the FBI, recruitment workshop. And, I actually, there is evidence of it. Here we go. I'm finding the old article. Here we go. Wow, this is wild. Here is the old article. I think I found it, right? From years ago when the FBI, here we go. Cleveland Fist protests FBI, November 5th, 2009. Me, my girlfriend, a local Native American activist, and an old boomer, we protested outside of the FBI recruitment workshop at my college, right? In support of Leonard Peltier, right? That was something, right? And you can read the article about it. But the FBI came to my campus to recruit, and we had an information sheet. We passed out over 200 leaflets with an info sheet about COINTELPRO. I've been doing this stuff for years. My credentials as a leftist, as an anti-imperialist, are massive, right? So when the FBI came to my college campus in 2009 to recruit people, we protested them and revealed the history of COINTELPRO. Right. And I have always called for the freedom of Leonard Peltier. I've always called for the freedom of the Black Liberation Army. There needs to be a blanket amnesty for all those people. Folks, this is not something that a lot of leftists are going to want to hear, but I don't care. At this point, I don't care. We need to add the January 6th defendants to that list. We need to call for a blanket amnesty for all the January 6th protesters. Buffalo Head, whatever his name is, shaman, let him go, right? All of them, Oath Keepers, all of them. It was a sting operation. It is now a fact. We know as a fact that the government set up that event. All of those people need to be released. All of them. Blanket amnesty. Let the Black Panthers out. Let the Weather Underground people out. Let Leonard Peltier out. Let the January 6th people out. You have to. I'm sorry. I'm not against the right wing. I'm against the U.S. imperialist state. And these people got fucked by the U.S. imperialist state because they were aligned with a president that the pro-war lobby didn't like. They need to be released. Period. It's that simple. Now, I know if you want to play this left-right game, well, they're racist, Caleb. They're racist. They're anti-communist. Of course they are. I don't care. I don't care. The U.S. deep state set a trap for these people, framed them up, and now they're in jail. They've been taken away from their families. These are fathers. These are mothers. These are, children who need to see their parents. Let them out. I don't think that we should be allowing the U.S. government. They should free all the Muslim political prisoners who've been framed up. All of them should be freed. Informants who go into mosques and they get somebody on making a joke, let them out. I am for a blanket amnesty for all political prisoners. There should be no political prisoners in America. As long as we have a government that works for Wall Street, that works for the Pentagon, that works for the big banks and corporations and military contractors, as long as we have a Wall Street monopolist regime, they should not be able to jail people for their political views, right? This is a dictatorship of capital that we live under. This is a capitalist dictatorship, and it is our job as anti-imperialists to weaken it. So we need to demand, as revolutionaries, as anti-imperialists, a blanket amnesty for all the January 6th protesters. Not that we endorse what they did. Look, we've seen what people did in videos. If they actually did that, wasn't cool. We don't encourage, just like we don't support what the Weathermen did. The Weathermen shouldn't have done what they did, right? Left adventurous terrorism isn't good. The Black Liberation Army, we don't endorse their activities either. But the context of what the Black Liberation Army did was COINTELPRO, was the murder of Fred Hampton, was lies and murder and killing by the U.S. government. And the context of what these people did on January 6th was the same thing. FBI informants set them up. It was a sting. We have to release them. And if we're really against the state, I don't care if you're against the right wing. If you're really against the state, you should agree with me. You should agree with me, right? I don't care. I don't care. J6ers want to murder communists. Yeah, you know why? Because they think communists are Joe Biden. And if I thought communists were Joe Biden, I would want to murder communists too, right? I mean, they think communists are the kind of people who get on the internet and try to destroy people's lives because they tweeted wrong about gender, right? I mean, if I thought Joe Biden was a communist, if I might have the similar anger, but I don't think that, right? That's the point, right? These January 6ers are wrong, but they're against the state, and your woke left liberal kids aren't. They're not. Your woke left liberal kids are not against the deep state. These people were framed up by the deep state, and they need to be released. Now, I don't agree with what they did. The activities that they engaged in were clearly criminal, but they took place in the context of criminal activities by law enforcement, right? Entrapment, people have to understand, have the government lock them up too. So it's important to support a blanket. Yeah, that's exactly right. If they can do it to them, they can do it to us. That's what people don't get. They don't understand that, the government doesn't sit there and go, okay, we're only going to lock up right-wingers today. If they can frame these people up, if they can entrap them, if they can entrap them, they can entrap us, right? And that's why we have to call for a blanket amnesty. There should be no political prisoners in America. Free the January 6th people, Doesn't mean we endorse what they did, right? Doesn't even mean that we say they're all innocent, right? I mean, clearly, some of them were clearly doing bad stuff. Obviously not. We oppose all illegal activity. We do not endorse what they did. We do not endorse what they did. CPI is a completely legal organization. We're an educational organization. We're not even really an activist group. I mean, we get on bullhorns here and there, but we do not endorse what they did. We don't endorse what the Weathermen did. We don't endorse what the Black Liberation Army did. What we're saying is, in the context of widespread illegal activity by the government, people need to be released. That we have a government of big corporations and monopolies, that is violating the rights of the citizens. And in this context, when it's clear these people were entrapped and set up, we call for a blanket amnesty. And please, this is another thing. I am so tired of people on the internet calling me a punk because I don't advocate violence. Like, I'm sorry, advocating violence is illegal. Did you know that? First of all, it's illegal. Now, if you're just going to do it on Twitter and you're nobody, they don't care. But if you're me, it's a little bit more illegal. If somebody like me were to do something, advocate violence, I would probably go to jail. But even if that were not the case, even if I had total free speech to advocate violence, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it because serious revolutionaries don't, right? Revolutions only happen as an act of self-defense. Read the history of communism. Mao did not want to go up into the mountains with a gun. Mao didn't want to do that. Mao was part of the KMT government with Chiang Kai-shek. And then Chiang Kai-shek kicked him out of the government and started murdering communists, and they had to go to the countryside. And the peasants were already killing their landlords. There was in Hunan, there was already peasant uprisings. So in the context of being violently suppressed and the peasants already revolting, the communists joined the peasant uprising and led it. And then when Japan invaded China, Mao joined a coalition with Chiang Kai-shek again. And then after the Second World War, Mao wanted to form a coalition government with Chiang Kai-shek again, and Chiang Kai-shek said no, and then they had another war. Mao never wanted to have a violent revolution. Mao did everything he could to not have a violent revolution. And the same with the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks wanted to have democracy in Russia. They wanted an elected government. And so they joined a democratic uprising against the Tsar. The Tsar was toppled. And after that, they wanted to end the war. And they were leading strikes and protests demanding an end to the war. And so Levar Kornilov, who was the military leader, started marching toward St. Petersburg. And he was going to crush the protests of the Bolsheviks. And he was going to crush the provisional government. And so Lenin and the Bolsheviks defended democracy. And they defended the provisional government, the very government they were protesting against. They defended it from a fascist military coup. And at that point, their military was bigger, and their assemblies, their Soviets, were basically the government. So they said, we're basically the government now, and they became the government. They had the October Revolution. But the Bolsheviks did not want a violent revolution. The Bolsheviks wanted democracy, and they defended democracy. And there's many examples of this. Fidel Castro, he wanted a peaceful transition in Cuba, but they had a brutal dictatorship under Batista. They had a brutal dictatorship. And Fidel Castro said in many of his writings, he said, we don't want violence. And in Colombia, this is important. In Colombia, the FARC, right? They were getting guns and weapons from Cuba because Colombia was a military dictatorship. But in the 90s, Colombia transitioned to having open elections. And so the Communist Party of Colombia voted to join the Colombian government. And the FARC refused to stop engaging in armed struggle. So Cuba cut off its arms to the FARC, which was the right thing to do. Because the FARC, they were engaging in violence for violence sake. The only time violent revolutions ever happen is when the people have no other choice, when their democratic rights are threatened, when their ability to get elected, to organize peacefully is suppressed. At that point, people have the right to defend themselves. And that's very, very different. That's very, very different. This idea that, we're going to go out, have act crazy and some of the stuff people are saying, that is not Marxism, right? That's called adventurism. That's called punchism. That's called Blanquism. And it is a deviation of our movement. Read William Z. Foster, the leader, the greatest American communist. the greatest communist in American history, William Z. Foster. Read what he advocated. He advocated the formation of an anti-monopoly coalition, an anti-imperialist government. This was the greatest communist. This is a guy that Mao Zedong wrote personal telegrams to, congratulating him on defeating Earl Browder. He didn't advocate violence. This is the guy who led the steel strike of 1919. He led the unemployment councils. Who wrote Toward Soviet America. But even he said, we don't want violence. We want a peaceful transition, but the capitalists may not allow it. And Gus Hall said the same thing, and that serious revolutionaries do not advocate violence. And this is a really, really important point. It's a really, 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 really important point. Serious revolutionaries do not advocate violence. They don't advocate illegal activity either. They advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. But they recognize that if the capitalists were to move to abolish democracy and to set up a fascist state, it would be the responsibility of communists to defend democracy from fascism. And that's what they did in China, and that's what they did in Russia, and that's what they did in Cuba, and that's what they've done elsewhere, right? We want to take power peacefully. We want to participate in elections. And the only time that we're forced to take power in other ways is when the road of peaceful transition is blocked. And this is the responsible way to talk about this issue, right? And that anyone who comes along and doesn't talk this way is full of shit. Okay, I'm just telling you that. If someone comes along and they're like, nuh-uh, you can't vote in, so maybe you can't, but you have to try, right? And there's certain tricks that people that have this silly ultra-leftist line like to say. They always say, you really think socialism could come about because of an election? Of course not. Socialism, the transition from one economic system to another, where one group of people, one group of people controls the means of production, and another group of people then controls them. A complete transfer of control over the economy could come about as a result of one election? Of course not. We don't think that. That's a trick, right? Socialism requires an upsurge of democratic participation. It requires huge mobilizations of the population. It requires big bodies, community assemblies and labor unions and parties. And it requires a huge upsurge of involvement among the population. No, the idea that we're going to have socialism just because we have an election one day and everyone just happened to check that box, that's what happened. Of course not. So when people say, oh, well, you think socialism is going to come through elections? No. I think elections are one part of the struggle, but it has to be a society-wide struggle. There have to be strikes. There have to be community assemblies. There have to be big protests and mobilizations. There has to be ideological education, teaching people Marxism and revolutionary ideology. There has to be a change in the economy. It's so much bigger than that. But do we want a peaceful transition to socialism? Yes. Do we want a transition to socialism through the democratic process? Yes. Would we prefer to avoid civil war and violence? Yes. And those kind of things, they do happen. And around the world, many communist revolutions have been very, very violent. That has happened. It has absolutely happened. But it has only happened because the road of peaceful transition was blocked. And that's an important warning to our leaders. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy both said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Let me repeat that. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And if they won't allow people to peacefully organize, peacefully elect socialist candidates, peacefully enact an economic program to change society, and if they violently suppress people's ability to organize, then they're the ones that would be paving the way for some kind of violent revolution. We don't want that. We want a peaceful transition to socialism. And the people that call me a punk and a sellout and a revisionist for saying that, the reason you're saying that is because it doesn't matter. You have no mass base. You don't have an organization. You don't have international connections. And you just spouting off on the internet, I want violence, just doing that doesn't mean anything, right? You know, you can get on the internet and say, I'm going to go steal $1 million. But if you're not actually going to steal $1 million, no one cares, right? It doesn't matter. You can just, I mean, that's like farting in the wind, right? And so you can get on the internet and talk about how ultra revolutionary you are because you advocate some illegal, violent thing. It doesn't matter because there's no you're never going to do it, number one. And number two, it doesn't matter that you advocate that because no one's listening to you. And it does, people on the internet like that, it's juvenile and it's stupid. And I did talk that way at one point in my life. I'll be honest. You know, at one point when I was in the Workers' World Party, we were an ultra-left organization. The Workers' World Party is an ultra-left group. It's a tiny sect. It's a remnant of the Cold War. And they did talk this way sometimes. And they were wrong. And they would always get upset. I would read William Z. Foster and I would talk about a peaceful transition to socialism and they would get all upset. And I would say, so you're for violence? They're like, well, we don't say that. It's like, come on, grow up. You know, they're not, it's juvenile. It is juvenility, right? It is juvenility. Whenever anyone starts talking about how they want violent revolution, they're being juvenile. Right? And if you really want to read probably the best piece of writing on this topic that I have ever read, I will link it here in the chat. It's by William Z. Foster. It is called In Defense of the Communist Party and Its Indicted Leaders. It is a great pamphlet that William Z. Foster wrote. It was when the American government put the Communist Party of the United States, their leadership, on trial and accused them of preaching the violent overthrow of the government. And William Z. Foster wrote this beautiful pamphlet explaining how they were not guilty of that crime and laying out a thoroughly Marxist perspective on this question. You can go read it. Communists do not advocate a violent revolution. They don't, and they never have. There's not a single place that genuine communist forces have actively tried to have a violent revolution when a peaceful transition was possible. They've always done the opposite. They've participated in elections. They've held rallies and protests and demonstrations. And the places that have had violent revolutions, it's only happened because that's been made impossible. And if you look at Venezuela, for example, Hugo Chavez was able to take power and transition to socialism peacefully. Now, they tried to overthrow him. They had a violent coup to try and remove him. But then he suppressed that coup and they had to bring in a new constitution and they created a new military that got trained in Cuba. So the nature of the state had to change. They weren't able to build it with a capitalist state. And there was violent reaction to them. But they were able to take power initially peacefully in Venezuela. In Nicaragua in 2006, the Sandinistas were able to get back into power peacefully. Now they had to change a lot of things when they got in. So this is important stuff. This is really, really, really important stuff to talk about, right? You know, this is really, really important because if we're going to be serious about this, we're not going to be kids fooling around on the internet. We have to talk about this in a responsible way. I mean, the way Jason Unruhe talks on his channel where he's waving his airsoft gun around and he's got his mohawk, that's not responsible. That's not a serious political organization. That's not how someone like that is never going to win an election. Somebody like that is never going to lead an organization of millions of people. That's a goofball. We don't want to be goofballs. We want to be serious. We wear suits and ties. We want to get some shit done. We want to actually build a think tank and educate people about Marxism. That's what we want to do. But there you go. And that actually is a good transition to the next thing I want to talk about. The next thing I wanted to talk about. Folks, this is a book. I read this book a really long time ago. This is called Being Read by Howard Fast. And this is the guy who wrote the novel Spartacus. He wrote the novel Freedom Road. He was a famous American novelist who joined the Communist Party. And And this is it's an interesting book. He joined the Communist Party during World War II when they were being very moderate because they were trying to support the war effort against the Nazis. And then as World War II ended, the Communist Party got much more radical because the Cold War was starting. And he stayed in the Communist Party all through McCarthyism, when they were being outlawed, when members were being put in prison. He left over the Khrushchev revelations, but this is his account. This is his account. This is his account of communism and being in the Communist Party during the 1950s, McCarthyism. It's very good. And I want to read you a passage from this book. It's a short passage. It's going to be hard for me to read it without crying. And the reason it's going to be hard for me to read it without crying is because I met people who were there during this time, right? I have told you all I made a little documentary about a woman named Frances Dostal. Frances Dostal, she was part of the anti-Korean War movement. We all know about the protests against the Vietnam War. But in the middle of McCarthyism, in like 1948, 49, 1950, 1951, 1952, there was a small communist-led protest movement against the Korean War. And Frances Dostal, she was in nursing school at the time, and she actually described protesting against the Korean War when the Communist Party was completely illegal, when it was secretive, and how they protested against it. And she was, she was like in her early 20s during those years. And she described protesting against the Korean War. Well, in this book by Howard Fast, he also describes protesting against the Korean War. And I'm just going to read you he describes in a few paragraphs what it was like for our comrades back in 1950, how it was they had to protest when the Korean War was happening. When, millions of people were being killed on the Korean Peninsula, when China and the Red Army were fighting against the U.S. imperialists on the Korean Peninsula aligned with Kim Il-sung. In America, it was completely illegal to be the communist. Communists were in prison. The FBI was crushing the Communist Party. And a few people had the courage in New York City to protest against the Korean War. And this is what happened. I'm going to read it to you. And it was also at a time that a lot of communists and leftists were being arrested, McCarthyism. This is what he wrote. He said, "We wanted to do something for the people arrested and imprisoned, either because they would not name names or because they were involved with the Communist Party leadership. I wrote an impassioned speech against the police state, against war, and then I recorded it in a friendly studio. We rented a room, Irv and I and Julie Troupin, at the old Astor Hotel on the 12th floor, if I remember correctly. And we brought into the room a record player and a loudspeaker with good amplification. We had a timer to start the record. After we set up the mechanism, we opened up the window. We set the loudspeaker on a chair facing the open window and Broadway. And we closed the door behind us, and then we broke the key in the lock. And then we went down the street and waited on the east side of Broadway. And it was quite extraordinary. Everyone in the area heard a voice denouncing the drive to war. The record was 18 minutes long, and the message finished and started all over again, and finished and began to play a third time. Almost finished its third playing before they finally got into the room and stopped it. And from a distance, it may seem like a childish caper, but remember that except for a handful of left-wing periodicals, with a combined circulation of 200,000, the vast apparatus of the media was closed to our ideas. closed to any arguments for peace. We felt that it wasn't enough to face imprisonment or blacklisting or slander. We had to be heard. And if we were not heard, there would be no voice for what we thought was best for America. Can you believe this? Because there was no other way to get the message out. Back in 1950, he just described, they rented a hotel room. They got speakers and a record player, and they set a timer, and they broke the lock, and so that it would be hard to open the door. And they ran down the street, and they waited for the timer, and then an anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-police state speech blasted through Times Square. That's what our comrades had to do to get the message out there. That's how hard it was. There was no TV. There was no Facebook. There was no YouTube back then. I mean, there was TV back then, but there were 3 channels. Most people had 3 channels, and those channels were not going to allow communists or anti-imperialists on there. And they were so dedicated. They were so dedicated that that's what they had to do. It was so important to get an anti-imperialist message that they rented a hotel room, they got a record player, and they blasted it out there. And if Howard Fast and our comrades can do this, if that's what our comrades can do, then you can come to our conference. You can make it to Washington, D.C., and we can have an amazing conference March 25th and 26th. You can make it. You can be there. If they can do that just to get the message out there, we don't have to do that now. We're allowed to have open conferences that aren't broken apart by the FBI. We're allowed to be here on YouTube streaming. So there's no excuse, right? If our comrades can do that at a time when the party leadership is all in jail and they're being rounded up and there's a Korean War going on, then us holding a conference, just coming to Washington, D.C. for a conference, easy to do. So sign up. Sign up. Okay. So just sign up, right? I mean, we need you to sign up. But actually, a couple of the people that are going to be coming to our conference and speaking have made some really great videos. And so we're going to put those videos on there. Why not, right? This is Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin, longtime friend of mine, just a great guy all around. Met him at the CPI Austin conference. He gave an amazing talk there. He's coming. He's actually making like a documentary about the conference, which is so awesome. Here we go. This is Peter Coffin.
It's Peter Coffin, author of books, most recently Woke Ouroboros, documentarian with my series of very important documentaries, most recently Less Sucks. And I am really excited. We're going to be doing an event called the Summit Against Hypocrisy, which is basically a counter forum to the Summit for Democracy that the Biden administration is ironically putting on. You know, the primary imperialist force in the world gathering together with the leaders of a few other countries that support it, claiming to promote democracy. I'm going to speak and host a panel there. Garland Nixon's going to be there. Nick Braun is going to be there. Jyoti Barr is going to be there. Plenty of others. I'll include a link in the description to the Eventbrite. That's going to include all the relevant information, and it's going to be consistently updated until the day of the actual event. It's in Washington, D.C., and I want everybody who can be there to be there. That's the Center for Political Innovation's Summit Against Hypocrisy on March 25th and 26th. See you there.
That's Peter Coffin. That's Peter Coffin. He is going to be there. He'll be chairing one of the panels. He's going to be awesome. And then we have another friend of mine. This guy, he has a great YouTube channel. One of these days, we're just going to have him on this channel. But I guess today we're just going to show his video. This is Bismuth Hertz, and he's also going to be there. So there we go.
Everybody, this is Bismuth Hertz, and today I am recording this video to let you know that I will be attending the Summit Against Hypocrisy. That is right, I will be attending this anti-imperialist rally hosted by CPI, and you can see the details for this rally online here, the Summit Against Hypocrisy. And I just wanted to talk about this rally a bit. So, this is going to be on Saturday, March 25th through March 26th. If you sign up, you'll learn where it is. And this is going to be, a whole 2-day event in Washington, D.C. to respond to Joe Biden's Summit for Democracy. Well, this is our summit against hypocrisy, right? The point is to hopefully, have a very strong and distinct counter to Joe Biden's message. We're going to have Garland Nixon. I'm a big fan of Garland Nixon. He's on Radio Sputnik. We have Nick Brana. That is the People's Party organizer, Nick Brana, big name. Jody Brar, she is a very important Marxist-Leninist theory. I believe she's a theoretician. I believe she's British, and she's had a lot of conversations with Caleb Maupin, great conversations. We're also going to have Peter Coffin, who is someone who lives outside of the Matrix and makes very, very interesting videos. Nobody quite like Peter Coffin. So, this rally, it's going to have music, performance, and art. You will laugh, you will cry. I can guarantee, if you show up to this rally, it will be an experience. It certainly will be. If you've never attended a CPI rally before, you may have your idea about what it's like. Well, okay, I am going to be there, and I plan on giving a speech about China. So, it's pretty easy to point out U.S. hypocrisy on China, and I'm going to do it gratuitously and maybe even teach the audience a thing or two that they didn't know. I look forward to seeing the speeches at this rally. We're going to have a lot of people in CPI. Maybe they're not as experienced giving speeches, maybe this will be one of their first speeches, but, we're also going to have a lot of, really good speeches, I anticipate, really interesting speeches. So, please attend this rally if you can, sign up if you can. I'm going to fly out all the way to DC, and so if you go to this rally, you'll definitely will meet me at this rally, and I just want everybody to know about it. Consider donating to it. If you like what I'm doing and saying, then you probably should just donate to CPI. Don't donate to me necessarily. And when you donate to CPI, you are in a way donating to me. You're donating to everybody that CPI is supporting and helping to give a voice. And I am one of those people, right? As much effort and time as I put into CPI, I get it back. And it leads me to good opportunities like being able to speak at this rally. So if you join CPI, you can have a mutually supportive relationship in an organization that is actually going to care about you and is actually going to let you think how you want to while focusing on the more fundamental points of agreement. And I think that's a wonderful thing, and that's why I'm a member of CPI. Now, I also want to shortly bring up the PSL Answer Coalition rally. Now, previously I said that I'm not invited to this rally. Well, in truth, I am not invited to this rally. You know what I'm saying? They didn't say I can't go. I am just simply, not going to attend because I don't feel like going out to, to, where is this rally? It is at Washington, D.C., at the White House, right? I don't feel like going out to Washington, D.C. on March 18th and then going out again for CPI or staying there the whole time. I don't feel like going, right? But, I could go if I wanted to. And, I do believe in a fundamental unity. I do believe in an ideal world that Answer and PSL would be able to at least bond with us and agree with us on this very fundamental thing, hopefully we would be able to be in a mutually supportive relationship with PSL as well. Previously I was very negative about them because I've personally had a negative experience with PSL, but, the mature and objective perspective will see that it is necessary to create ties and connections wherever we can. CPI is actually sponsoring that PSL rally. Doesn't mean we agree with everything PSL does, but we're hoping that, maybe they'll see it as a good faith gesture and we can, do the mature thing and unite on fundamental agreements. So I just wanted to point out, mostly that CPI rally, the Summit Against Hypocrisy. I am going, so go, donate, support us. We're going to grow. If you give money to CPI, it's not going to be eaten, and disappear. It's actually going to yield tangible results. It means that, CPI might help somebody pay for their plane ticket to get to the rally. It means CPI might be able to afford to keep more people at a hotel in Washington, D.C. It means that CPI might have more or higher quality food or amenities for the people that are doing this, better microphones, better cameras, all these things. It's very tangible. CPI is a very purpose-driven and organized group of people. We are trying to get things done. We are trying to create rallies, and it's actually really amazing that we've been able to do everything that we've done so far, and that we're getting started up so quickly and creating a presence so quickly. And if you remember our recent rallies, the footage from the intro of those rallies has become somewhat of an icon, maybe a controversial one, but we know how to get attention. We know how to cause a fuss, cause a stir. Our audiences will laugh and cry at our rallies. We know how to create an engaging and interesting rally that's going to get attention. That's our goal. So please try to help us out with that, and hopefully I will see you there. So bye guys.
Yeah, that was a great video from Bismuth Hertz. That was tremendous. That was tremendous. So yeah, if you can't make it, I see there's a couple people in the chat. Donate, help us do it. Just give us a donation to help us put on the event. That's really helpful. And if you are going and you still want to donate, that's appreciated as well. But this is going to be a really important conference. The amount of high level people there, Scott Ritter, Nick Brana, at this point, we're going to have Jyoti Brar, from the CP, GBML, important British communist who's flying in. We're going to have Daniel Villa. We're going to have Don DeBar. It's turning into quite a shindig, as they say. So, who knows how often we'll be able to have conferences like this, and like I said, we're lucky. We're very, very lucky that we don't live in full fascism yet. We already have to keep the location secret from Antifa because people love to smear us and threaten violence against us. We already have to have crazy security, and we will be having heavy security at these kind of conferences, right? We're going to make sure our speakers are protected and that no one's hurt. But it's great that we're able to have this conference. So yeah, I want to encourage everyone to attend. And if you can't attend, send us a donation. A donation would always help. So